Imagine you finally found your small piece of paradise, the perfect house, a quiet community where nothing, it seems, can disturb your peace. But when I tried to make this paradise my own, simply by planting a small garden, I came face to face with an injustice I couldn't have imagined. It turned out the perfect facade of Magnolia Creek was hiding a shocking truth. What started as a battle for the right to plant flowers turned into the exposure of a multi-million-dollar scam that changed everything. You won't believe how deep the game went, or who was truly the victim. The sun warmed my skin, a gentle balm on the lingering ache of grief that had become my permanent resident. I lay on the chaise lounge by the turquoise water, the kind of stillness that only a new life in a new place can offer. My hands, still slightly stained with the rich black potting soil from yesterday, were busy sketching. I wasn't drawing a masterpiece. I was mapping out a future that, I was beginning to realize, had to be about more than just remembering David. It had to be about creating something new, something that would bloom. The Magnolia Creek community was the definition of idyllic. Gated, perfectly manicured, and so quiet you could hear the distant drone of a landscaping truck a half mile away. It was all David's idea. "Eleanor, my darling," he'd said with that familiar twinkle in his eye, "we're not getting any younger. We need a place where our knees won't protest every time we go for a walk. A place with a pool where you can just float. And a yard big enough for you to turn into your own little Eden." He'd always believed in my ability to make things grow. It was one of the many things I loved about him. And so here I was, meticulously outlining the layout for the community garden. I imagined rows of vibrant snapdragons, fragrant lavender, and the cheerful yellow of sunflowers. A place where neighbors could gather, share stories, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a new rhythm without him. My biggest challenge, I mused, would be convincing the homeowners association to let me tear up a perfectly good patch of lawn for a communal dirt pit, as David had so lovingly called my previous gardening attempts. I was smiling to myself, a genuine, full-bodied smile for what felt like 100 years. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were crisp, purposeful, and altogether too close. The kind of shoes that cost more than my first car. I looked up to see a woman standing over me. Her sunglasses were large enough to obscure half her face, and her expression was one of cool, clinical disapproval. She was maybe 40, dressed in white linen that seemed surgically pressed, and held a small yapping dog that looked like a cloud with legs. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with an icy politeness that was more condescending than any direct insult. I blinked. The sun was in my eyes, but her tone was unmistakable. "Yes," I said, and a new smile, a more mischievous one, tugged at the corners of my mouth. "I certainly hope so. I bought this place just last month." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "You bought it?" The way she said it, it was as if I'd just announced I'd purchased the moon. She looked me up and down, from my faded floral one-piece swimsuit to the worn-out Crocs I wore for gardening, then to the sketch pad in my lap. Her lip curled slightly. "That's interesting. I don't believe I've seen you at any of the new resident welcomes. My name is Tiffany. I'm the head of the welcome committee and of the Architectural Review Board, and the Social Planning Board." "Eleanor," I said, extending a hand she pointedly ignored. "My husband and I closed on the house in June. Well, I did. He passed away shortly before. I just moved in. Things have been a bit of a whirlwind, as you can imagine." She didn't care. "Right. So you're here alone." It wasn't a question. "Look, Eleanor, I don't want to cause any trouble, but people in Magnolia Creek tend to look a certain way. You can understand. My point is, we've had some issues with unauthorized personnel trying to use the amenities. And I'm sure you're very good at what you do, but this is a very exclusive club. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even finished grieving and I was already being judged. Not for what I'd done, but for what she thought I was. For my appearance. My face, my age, my clothes, all of it screamed unauthorized personnel to her. It was so absurd I had to suppress a laugh. A woman in my position, a woman who owned this entire magnificent house and all its sprawling grounds, was being accused of trespassing on her own property? It was beyond ridiculous. It was a comedy of errors written by someone with a very narrow worldview. I felt a surge of indignation. All those years I had spent raising my family, working, saving, and sacrificing, all for this moment of peace, this brief respite, and this human-sized stick of margarine was going to ruin it. My internal monologue was already a running commentary. Did she think I was the pool guy? No, I'd be in uniform. The landscaper? Too much floral print. A squatter, perhaps? A very neat, very well-read squatter with a penchant for sketching garden plans. I assure you, Tiffany, I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. I am not here to use the amenities. I am here as a homeowner, using my own private amenities. And I'd rather not be disturbed. I have a lot to think about. I gestured vaguely at my sketch pad. She didn't back down. In fact, her voice hardened. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask for some proof of residency, or I'll have to call security. It's for everyone's protection. The irony was not lost on me. My protection? From what, exactly? My own house? The woman was delusional, drunk on a cocktail of her own superiority and a complete lack of common sense. I looked at her perfectly coiffed hair and her condescending sneer, and I thought about David. He would have found this hilarious. He would have told me to just call her bluff, to tell her I was the new owner and that her job as the welcome committee wasn't off to a great start. But he wasn't here. And this wasn't about being funny anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about showing this woman, and maybe all of Magnolia Creek, that I had a right to be here, that my life and my home were not a backdrop for her baseless assumptions. This was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a test, and I was not about to fail it. What happened next changed the course of everything, forcing me to confront not just this woman, but the entire social hierarchy of Magnolia Creek. You're not going to want to miss how this plays out. My mind was racing. Proof of residency, she had said. A little thrill, a kind of dark, bitter delight shot through me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. My husband David was a man who believed in documentation. Our entire lives were a series of perfectly filed folders, spreadsheet, and meticulously labeled boxes. I could produce a deed, a title, a utility bill, and a certified letter from the previous owner in about 5 minutes flat. I could provide a full accounting of every light bulb, every drop of paint, every single square inch of this property she was standing on. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about principle. It was about the arrogant presumption that someone like me, a 60-year-old woman in a simple swimsuit, could not possibly belong in a place like this. I sat up on the chaise, my face now level with her perfectly pedicured toes. Look, Tiffany, I said, my voice dropping to a low, serious register. Let me make one thing crystal clear. I am standing on my property, next to my pool, in the home that my late husband and I worked our entire lives for. I don't have to prove anything to you, to security, or to the entire welcome committee. You, on the other hand, are standing on private property without my permission, and I am asking you to leave. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Her carefully constructed smile faltered, replaced by a scowl. You can't be serious. This is a serious infraction. You're violating community rules. We have a standard protocol for these things, and I am simply following it." She held her tiny dog tighter as if it were a weapon. My eyebrows went up. A serious infraction for lying on my own chaise lounge, for existing in the manner to which I've become accustomed. I couldn't help it. The sarcasm just bubbled out, a protective layer against her absurdity. "Are you perhaps mistaking me for an exotic garden gnome that's escaped its front yard and made its way to the pool? Because I can assure you I am not a lawn ornament. I am Eleanor, and this is my home." She took a step back, visibly flustered. "You are being very uncooperative. The Architectural Review Board will be informed of this. The Social Planning Board, too. And I can assure you we have ways of dealing with people who don't fit in." "Don't fit in," she had said. That was the core of it, wasn't it? Not a broken rule, not a safety concern, but a matter of taste, of fitting in with her perfectly manicured world. And it was a world I was suddenly itching to disrupt. I thought about the community garden I was planning, the one that would introduce messy, unkempt beauty into her pristine landscape. I thought about David, whose stubbornness was a quality I had often found endearing and was now realizing I had inherited. He would have told me to fight this with every ounce of my being. "Some battles, Ellie," he'd say, "you don't win with a sword, you win with a sharp mind and a little theatrical flair." A theatrical flair, indeed. This whole thing was a performance, and I was about to get my big break. I took a deep breath, looking around at the serene, silent neighborhood. A little voice in my head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like my late husband, reminded me that maybe this wasn't all bad. After all, if this was the kind of nonsense that went on in Magnolia Creek, maybe someone needed to tell the story. Someone needed to pull back the curtain on this perfect little performance. Someone needed to show that not all that glitters is gold, and sometimes the shiniest people are the emptiest. And if that someone was me, a quiet 60-year-old woman who just wanted to grow some flowers, well then, so be it. "You know what, Tiffany?" I said, pushing myself up to a standing position. "You can inform every board you want. You can inform the entire state. But the moment you take one more step on my property, I will be calling my lawyer. I may look like someone you can push around, but I can assure you looks can be very, very deceiving." Just as her face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated fury, a kind voice cut through the tension. "Is everything all right over here, Tiffany?" We both turned to see an older gentleman, perhaps in his late 70s, standing by his mailbox. He had a kind, weathered face and a shock of white hair. He was wearing an old fishing hat and a t-shirt that read, "Retired and loving it." He looked like a man who genuinely enjoyed living, and it was a welcome contrast to Tiffany's manic anxiety. Tiffany immediately changed her demeanor. The sneer was gone, replaced by a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth hurt. "Oh, hello, Mr. Henderson. Yes, everything's just fine. I was just welcoming our new neighbor. Things got a little confused. It's all sorted now." She gave me a tight, fake smile. Mr. Henderson's gaze shifted to me. His eyes were crinkled at the corners with warmth. "A new neighbor? Well, welcome to Magnolia Creek. Name's Arthur Henderson. I'm just over there." He gestured to the house next door, a beautiful old place with a porch swing. I looked at Tiffany, then back at him. It was a lifeline, a moment of sanity in a sea of madness. "Eleanor," I said, and the relief in my voice was palpable. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Arthur. It seems I've already been thoroughly welcomed." The sarcasm was subtle, but I could tell by the slight twitch of Arthur's mouth that he understood. Tiffany, sensing she had lost the upper hand and desperate to escape, offered one last venomous glance. "Well, Eleanor, I'll be in touch about the paperwork." With that, she turned on her heel and marched away, her little dog yapping like a tiny self-important echo. I was left standing in the sun, my heart pounding. The tranquility I had felt just moments before was shattered, replaced by a simmering anger. Arthur walked over, a knowing smile on his face. "Don't mind Tiffany. She's the self-appointed queen of everything. The rest of us just let her be." He chuckled. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that on your first day of peace." "First day of peace," I repeated, looking from my home to his, and then down at my now crumpled garden sketch. I thought I'd be planting flowers, not fighting battles. Arthur's kindness was a comfort, but it didn't erase the feeling of being judged, and it didn't change the cold, hard fact that Tiffany would be back. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning of my battle for acceptance in Magnolia Creek, and I had a sinking suspicion that the next battle wouldn't be so easily interrupted. The real war, the one that would change everything, was just getting started. Arthur's kindness, though a balm for my bruised pride, couldn't erase the sinking feeling in my stomach. Tiffany's parting shot, "I'll be in touch," had the distinct ring of a promise, not a threat. And I knew, with the certainty of a woman who has seen more than her share of small-town politics, that she would make good on it. My first day in this paradise had ended not with a blissful nap, but with a quiet, simmering anger. The silence that had once felt so peaceful now felt charged, expectant, like the calm before a storm. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to the small, comforting routines of my new life. I unpacked another box of David's books, arranged a few of his old fishing lures on a shelf as a silent tribute, and started to water the struggling bushes the previous owners had left behind. But the peace was gone. Every car that drove by, every leaf blower I heard in the distance felt like a potential harbinger of doom. I half expected Tiffany to show up on my doorstep, flanked by a phalanx of perfectly pressed cronies demanding a full accounting of my life choices. The formal notice arrived 3 days later. It wasn't a mob, but a single official-looking envelope. The Magnolia Creek Homeowners Association logo was stamped in the corner, a little magnolia blossom that looked deceptively harmless. Inside was a crisp, official letter. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak. It noted that a neighborly concern had been raised regarding compliance with community standards for new residents. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. It was Tiffany. The letter informed me that a special meeting had been convened to address the matter, and that I was strongly encouraged to attend and present my plans for integration into the community. Plans for integration? I muttered to myself, rereading the phrase. I'm not a refugee seeking asylum from a hostile regime. I'm a homeowner who wants to plant a few flowers. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost funny, but the humor was tinged with a deep, bitter sadness. This was exactly what David and I had run from, the judgment and the insularity of places where people had too much money and not enough to do. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. The full weight of my solitude hit me in that moment. There was no David to make a joke, to tell me it would all be fine, to remind me that we'd faced bigger battles. It was just me, and for the first time since he was gone, I wasn't sure I was up to the fight. My old life, the one I'd lived with David, had prepared me for a lot of things. I was a fighter, but I had always fought with him by my side. He was the calm voice in the storm, the one who would laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. He was my rock, my anchor, and without him, I felt like a ship adrift. I found myself staring at his favorite coffee mug on the counter, the one that said, "World's Best Dad." It felt so heavy, so empty. I missed his voice, his steady presence, the simple comfort of his hand in mine. Was it worth it, I wondered, to fight a battle I was already losing? To prove my worth to a group of strangers who had already judged me? Maybe I should just give up. Let them have their perfect, sterile community. Let them win. But then I thought about my garden, my beautiful, messy, unruly garden, the one that was going to be full of life and color, the one that was going to honor the man who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Giving up would mean not only betraying myself, but betraying his memory. It would be an admission that I was exactly what they thought I was,
An outsider, a fragile, helpless old woman who could be pushed around. And something inside me, a stubborn, fiery spirit I hadn't known was there, flatly refused to go down without a fight. I wasn't going to just show up to their meeting and grovel. I was going to be proactive. My garden wasn't just a passion project, it was my plan for integration. It was a gesture of community, of goodwill. I would present it to them, not as a request, but as an offer, and I would make them understand that this was a project that would benefit everyone, not just me. The day of the meeting, I dressed with purpose. No flowery dresses or worn out shoes. I wore a crisp navy pantsuit, the one I hadn't worn since David's funeral. I put on a pair of sensible heels and my late husband's gold watch. It was a costume, a suit of armor I hoped would make me look like someone who belonged, someone to be taken seriously. I walked into the community clubhouse, my posture straight, my chin held high. The room was sterile and intimidating, filled with gleaming mahogany cables and polished chairs. The board members were already seated, a small circle of perfectly put together people. And at the head of the table, looking like the queen of her kingdom, was Tiffany. She gave me a tight, triumphant smile. "Mrs. Eleanor Bennett," Tiffany began, her voice dripping with formal politeness. "Thank you for joining us. We are here to address a small matter of concern." She gestured for me to take a seat, which I did, placing my garden plans on the table in front of me. As I sat down, I noticed the other board members. They were a trio of older women and a man in a polo shirt, all of them casting me the same sort of dismissive glances I'd gotten from Tiffany. They had already made up their minds. I decided to take control of the narrative. "Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify things. I believe the concern stems from a misunderstanding about my presence here. I am the legal and rightful owner of the property at 1224 Magnolia Lane, and I'm here today to present my first project for the community, a shared garden that will not only beautify the common area, but also serve as a hub for us all to connect." I slid my meticulously drawn plans across the table. Tiffany picked up the paper, her smile gone. She scanned it quickly, a look of pure contempt on her face. Then she passed it to the woman next to her, who did the same. "A garden?" one of the women scoffed. "We have professional landscapers for that." "This isn't about professional landscaping," I said, my voice rising with conviction. "It's about community, about making this place feel less like a sterile golf course and more like a home, a place where we can share and grow things together." I spoke passionately, with the conviction of a woman who genuinely believed in her cause. But my words fell on deaf ears. Tiffany and the board members exchanged a series of knowing glances, their silent communication more cutting than any spoken insult. "We've reviewed the proposal, Mrs. Bennett," Tiffany said, finally, her voice ice cold, "and the board has unanimously decided to reject it. We feel it's not in keeping with the aesthetic of the community. In fact, we've decided to move forward with a new rule regarding personal projects in common areas. You can consider this your formal warning." They had not even considered my plan. They had rejected it out of hand, not because it was a bad idea, but because it was my idea. Because I didn't fit in. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, prickly sensation that spread from my chest to my cheeks. They weren't just rejecting a garden, they were rejecting me. It was a deliberate, cruel, public slap in the face. My carefully constructed suit of armor felt flimsy. I was just a woman in a nice suit, fighting a battle she couldn't win. I stood up, pushing back my chair. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Thank you for your time." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of that room, leaving my plans on the table. They could have them. I had a new plan now, a much bigger one. I had come here to plant a garden, but it was becoming clear that this community needed something much more radical than flowers. It needed to be shaken to its core. And I had a feeling I was just the woman to do it. The war had officially begun. Walking out of that meeting felt like a victory, even though I had lost on every single point. It was a humiliating public defeat. a symbolic slap in the face, but the fire had been lit. They had tried to put me in my place, to make me feel small and insignificant. Instead, they had just given me a reason to fight. I walked home, my sensible heels clicking against the pavement, the anger a hard, bright stone in my stomach. The suit of armor had failed, so I'd have to find a new weapon, a much sharper one. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of furious energy. I wasn't planting flowers, I was digging for information. My living room was transformed into a command center. I pulled out my old laptop, the one David had bought me for Christmas years ago, and began my research. I was an investigative journalist of one, armed with Google and a healthy dose of righteous indignation. The Magnolia Creek HOA website was my first target. It was a masterpiece of vapid platitudes and carefully worded regulations. Every rule seemed designed to keep everything looking exactly the same, with no room for a stray blade of grass, let alone an unauthorized community garden. It was all about maintaining property values and aesthetic consistency, which I now knew was code for keeping out anyone who doesn't look like us. I cross referenced their public records with news articles and social media posts. The more I dug, the more cracks I found in their perfect veneer. A minor scandal from a few years back about a disputed landscaping contract, a lawsuit over a fence height violation that was mysteriously dropped. The whole thing smelled of quiet cronyism, of favors exchanged and rules bent for the right people. I wasn't finding anything that would land them in jail, but I was finding a pattern of behavior, a system of hypocrisy. They were all about rules, but only when it suited them. As I was poring over a zoning map, a soft knock came at the door. I almost didn't answer, half expecting Tiffany with another one of her self-important missives. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw Arthur Henderson. He was holding a small basket with a bow. I opened the door, a little surprised. "Arthur, hello," I said. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He smiled warmly. "Just thought I'd check in on you after your ordeal. My wife Carol made a batch of her famous oatmeal cookies. She said you looked like a woman who could use some." He handed me the basket. The gesture was so simple, so genuinely kind, it almost brought a tear to my eye. "Thank you, Arthur. That's very kind of you." I took the basket, the warmth of the cookies a physical comfort. "Come in. I was just in the middle of a war council." He chuckled and stepped inside, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of my living room. Maps, legal documents, and printouts were scattered across my coffee table. "A war council, huh? Looks like you've been busy. I was worried you'd be too upset after that meeting." I was upset for about 5 minutes, and then I decided they're not going to get away with it. They're bullies, Arthur. They judge people based on appearances, and they use their little clubhouse to make everyone feel small. It's disgusting. And it's not just me, is it? Arthur sighed and shook his head. "No, Eleonora, it's not just you. It's been happening for years. They run the place like a high school clique. If you don't have the right car or the right clothes or the right connections, you're on the outside looking in. Tiffany and her little group have shot down every idea for anything that might upset their little ecosystem. We tried to get a neighborhood block party going a few years back. Shut it down, said it would attract undesirables. We're just all tired of fighting." "Well, I'm not," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going to let them get away with this. Not with me and not with anyone else they've bullied. I'm going to beat them at their own game." Arthur looked at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "How are you planning on doing that? They've got all the power." "They have power because no one challenges them," I explained, my mind already racing with the plan I was forming. "The rest of the community is like you, Arthur. Good people who are just tired of fighting. But what if they didn't have to fight alone? What if they just had to listen? I'm starting a private online group for residents. Not on Facebook, but a simple, secure one. I'll call it Magnolia Creek Neighbors. Just a forum for people to talk, to share ideas, maybe to bring up a few concerns of their own. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The first post will be about something seemingly innocuous, something that will make people feel safe to join. And then, once they're in, I'll drop the real bombshells. The things I've been finding, the little abuses of power that add up to a big problem. Arthur's face lit up. A group? A private group? That's brilliant. So you're going to be a thorn in her side from the inside out? Exactly, I said. And I'll need your help, Arthur. You know everyone. You can be my mole. The phrase made me smile. It felt so wonderfully, deliciously subversive. Arthur agreed immediately, his kind face hardened by a new sense of purpose. He gave me a list of email addresses of his friends in the community, the ones he knew were tired of Tiffany's reign. That night, alone in my house, I wrote my first post. I kept it simple, friendly. I introduced myself as the new neighbor and invited everyone to join the group to share gardening tips and local recommendations. A few people joined almost immediately. Arthur and Carol, the woman who lived 3 doors down with the poodle, a few more strangers. And then, feeling a surge of defiant courage, I crafted my next post. It was a simple question, accompanied by a screenshot of a rule from the HOA handbook and a picture I'd taken that morning. The picture was of Tiffany's front yard, which was in clear violation of the exact rule she had cited to get my garden plan rejected. The post simply read, "Just a friendly question for the community. Are there different rules for different people?" I posted it, watching as the little scene count began to tick up. I felt a surge of exultation. This wasn't a battle of personalities anymore. This was a battle of information. And I had a feeling that Tiffany, for all her bluster, had no idea she was about to face a very different kind of opponent. The silent war had begun.
The virtual silence that followed my post was deafening. My little online group, Magnolia Creek Neighbors, remained still, its member count slowly ticking up, but with no comments. For a full 24 hours, I watched and waited, my heart hammering in my chest like a nervous drum. Had I miscalculated? Had my attempt at a digital revolution fizzled out before it even began? I was worried I'd pushed too hard, too fast, and that the fear of offending Tiffany was stronger than the desire for change. Then a ping. A single comment appeared under my post. It was from a new member, a woman named Sharon. "Wow, Eleanor," she wrote. "I've been wondering the same thing about the no lawn ornaments rule. I got a nasty gram last year about my little garden gnomes." A few minutes later, another comment. "It's all about who you know," wrote a man named Bob. "We got a fine for a broken mailbox, and it's been 6 months and still no repair on the street. Different rules indeed." The dam had broken. The comments started to trickle in, a slow, steady stream of shared frustrations, small injustices, and quiet complaints about the HOA's iron fist. They had all been waiting for someone to speak up, for a safe space to vent, and I had given it to them. The little online forum became a hub of information. People were sharing photos of cracked community sidewalks that had been reported for years but never fixed, of overgrown trees on HOA property that were a clear violation of their own rules, and of absurd fines levied against neighbors for things like leaving a garbage can out for 5 minutes too long. The hypocrisy of Tiffany and the board was now on full display, meticulously documented by the very people they had tried to silence. It was a beautiful, chaotic mosaic of grievances, and I felt a surge of pride. We were no longer fighting alone. We were fighting together. But of course, news travels fast in a small community, especially one ruled by a tyrant with a penchant for gossip. I got the call from Tiffany a day later. Her voice was pure venom, stripped of the fake politeness she'd used before. "Eleanor," she hissed, "what in the world do you think you're doing? I've seen your little group. You're causing trouble. You're undermining the very fabric of this community." I leaned back in my chair, a triumphant smirk on my face. "I'm not doing anything, Tiffany. I'm providing a forum for neighbors to communicate. Isn't that what community is all about?" The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. "Don't play coy with me," she spat. "You know exactly what you're doing. You're inciting dissent. You're a menace. If you don't take that group down and apologize to the board, you will face the consequences." The threat was clear and ominous. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. This was a battle for control of the community's narrative. I hung up the phone, a shiver of fear and exhilaration running down my spine. I knew she wasn't bluffing. She would come at me with everything she had, and she didn't waste any time. The very next day, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, citing a new rule that had apparently been passed by the board, a rule I had never heard of, regarding unauthorized social gatherings and unapproved communication platforms. The fine was astronomical, a number so ridiculous I almost laughed. $10,000 to be paid within 10 days. It was a transparent attempt to bankrupt me into submission. They were trying to scare me away, to make an example out of me. I looked at the letter, then at the photo on my mantle of David and I on our wedding day. He had always told me I was the strongest person he knew, and I was about to prove him right. I couldn't just pay the fine. It wasn't about the money. It was about standing up for what was right. But how could I fight a board that could just invent rules on the fly? I felt a wave of despair. My little revolution was about to be crushed under the weight of their financial power. As I was staring at the outrageous fine, a notification popped up in the Magnolia Creek Neighbors group. It was from a man I didn't know, a retired lawyer named Mark, and he had posted a screenshot of a legal document he had just found online, something called a Declaration of Trust. He had a quiet, thoughtful message for the group. "I think I figured out where all the money is going. This document is a complete game changer." I clicked on the link and my heart stopped. This wasn't about fines or lawn gnomes or rules anymore. This was about a secret that was so big that it would not only shake Magnolia Creek to its core, but it would also reveal a stunning betrayal that would change everything forever. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the link Mark had posted. The document loaded slowly, a dense file with a lot of official-looking jargon. It was titled Declaration of Trust for Magnolia Creek Community Enhancement Fund. I scanned the text, my eyes jumping over the legalese until they landed on something that made my blood run cold. The trust was, indeed, set up to receive community funds, but the sole beneficiary of that fund was not the community. It was a private LLC registered under the name the Magnolia Blossom Group. The list of officers and directors for that LLC was a who's who of the HOA board: Tiffany, her husband, the man in the polo shirt from the meeting, and two of her closest friends. The money we were all paying for community enhancements and property maintenance was going directly into their pockets. I read it again, my brain struggling to process the staggering betrayal. They weren't just overzealous entitled bullies. They were crooks. The $10,000 fine wasn't an attempt to enforce a rule. It was a shakedown. My garden was never going to be approved because they were never going to use the funds to build it. They were using it to pay for their private luxuries. I could see the puzzle pieces fitting together with sickening clarity. The unrepaired sidewalks, the lack of new community amenities, the mysteriously dropped lawsuits. It all made perfect, horrible sense. The indignation I had felt before was a small flame compared to the bonfire of pure rage now burning inside me. This wasn't just an unfair personal vendetta. It was a systemic theft,
a deliberate act of fraud against every homeowner in Magnolia Creek. My grief for David was momentarily eclipsed by this new righteous fury. He would have been appalled. He had always believed in fairness, in honesty, in the simple decency of people doing the right thing. These people were an affront to everything he stood for. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Arthur. "Did you see it? Mark just messaged me too. We need to talk. Now." A few minutes later, the two of them were in my kitchen, looking just as shaken as I felt. Mark, a gentleman with a quiet confidence, explained the legal details. "It's a shell corporation," he said, shaking his head. "A classic scam. They've been funneling the money from our monthly dues and special assessments into this private trust, and then using that money for personal expenses. That new fence Tiffany just put up, or the renovations on the clubhouse that took so long, my guess is it was all paid for with our money." "But how did you find this?" I asked, looking from him to Arthur, who was sitting at my kitchen table, a look of profound disgust on his face. "It was public record, buried under layers of corporate filings. They thought no one would ever bother to look. Most people just pay their dues and assume everything is above board. But when you asked your questions in the group, Eleanor, I started digging. My wife was complaining about the rising dues, and I thought I'd take a look. I never expected to find this." Arthur was pacing, his face red with anger. "I knew she was a bully. I knew she was a snake, but I never thought she was a thief." "What do we do, Eleanor? We can't just let them get away with this." We were a small council of war, a retired journalist, a retired lawyer, and a man who had lived here long enough to see the cracks in the facade. We decided on a plan. We couldn't go to the board again. They would just deny everything and use their financial power to crush us. We also couldn't go to the police yet. We needed to make our case airtight. No, our first step had to be to rally the community, to show them, with irrefutable proof, what was really going on behind the scenes. Over the next few days, we worked in secret. Arthur and Mark got a few more trusted neighbors to join our inner circle, all of them quietly furious about what they were uncovering. I meticulously organized all the documents Mark had found, cross-referencing them with the HOA's budget reports and community expenditures. We compiled a list of questions, each one a sharp blade designed to cut through Tiffany's lies. We decided we would present everything at the next general HOA meeting, a much larger gathering of all the homeowners, not just the board. We would force them to confront us in public, where they couldn't simply dismiss us or pretend we were an unauthorized social gathering. As the day of the meeting approached, the tension was palpable. Tiffany sent me another terse email warning me against further inflammatory behavior and threatening a new, even larger fine. It was an act of pure desperation, a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate me. But her threats had no power anymore. I wasn't scared. I was ready. I wasn't just fighting for my right to plant a garden anymore. I was fighting for the soul of Magnolia Creek. I was fighting for honesty, for transparency, and for the simple principle that a community is for its people, not for its predators. The whole community would be watching, and you are not going to want to miss what happens when we expose the entire scheme, revealing a truth that will bring them all down and change Magnolia Creek forever.
The days leading up to the general HOA meeting were a whirlwind of focused energy and quiet conspiracy. My living room had transformed from a makeshift command center into a war room. Arthur, Mark, and I spent hours meticulously preparing our case. We had all the documents printed and organized in a neat binder: the official HOA budget reports, the declaration of trust from Mark's discovery, and a series of photos I had taken of the community's neglected common areas: the broken sidewalks, the rusty playground equipment, the dying trees. Each photo was a silent accusation, a visual rebuttal to Tiffany's narrative of a perfectly maintained community. We weren't just fighting a battle of words anymore. We were fighting a battle of facts. Arthur, with his lifetime of neighborly connections, had been working the phones, discreetly urging people to attend the meeting.
It's important that we all show up this time, he'd say. There are some things that need to be discussed, and a lot of people have questions. He never mentioned my name or the online group, but the implication was clear. He was a master of subtle subversion. Mark, the calm, steady lawyer, was our rock. He patiently explained the legal jargon, helping us craft our presentation so it would be clear, concise, and impossible to dismiss. We need to show them the full scope of what's happening, but without sounding like a mob with pitchforks. We have to be the adults in the room. I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time since David passed, I had a purpose that was entirely my own. I wasn't fighting for his legacy. I was fighting for my own sense of justice. My loneliness was replaced by a sense of belonging, a quiet camaraderie with Arthur and Mark. We were the three musketeers of Magnolia Creek, a motley crew of retirees ready to take on the HOA. It was ridiculous and serious all at once. The night of the meeting, the air in the community clubhouse was thick with an uncharacteristic tension. The room was packed. People were standing along the walls, whispering to each other, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I saw neighbors I had never met before, people I'd only seen from my car. The usual small group of board members sat at the front table, and at its head, looking like a queen on her throne, was Tiffany. She was wearing a crisp white dress and a triumphant smile, clearly assuming this would be another routine meeting where she would lay down the law and no one would dare question her. She hadn't seen the fire in my eyes or the determined sets of Arthur and Mark's jaws. She had no idea she was about to face a very different kind of opponent. Tiffany started the meeting with her usual brand of patronizing cheer. "Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a strong turnout. It's a testament to the fact that we all care so deeply about our beautiful community. We have a few new items to discuss tonight, including a proposed new fine for—" She never got to finish her sentence. I stood up, my voice cutting through her polite chatter, amplified by the silent attention of the crowd. "Excuse me, Tiffany. I think there are a few more pressing matters that need to be addressed tonight." My voice didn't tremble. It was calm and steady, a direct challenge. Tiffany's perfect smile vanished, her eyes narrowed as she stared at me. "Eleanor, we have an agenda. You'll have a chance to speak during the open forum at the end of the meeting. My issue is with the agenda itself, and with the fact that for the last several years, this community has been governed in the shadows." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Arthur and Mark exchanged a quick, encouraging nod. This was it. "What is she talking about?" I heard someone whisper. "This is out of line, Eleanor. I will not have you disrupting this meeting. Sit down." "I'm not disrupting anything," I replied, reaching the front table. "I'm holding you accountable. You see, a few of us here have been doing some digging, not just in the flower beds, but in the books. And what we found is disturbing." I opened my binder and pulled out the first document, a printout of the HOA's most recent budget report, with a glaring discrepancy highlighted in red. For those of you who pay your dues every month, you might be interested to know that the community spent $0 last year on playground maintenance. And yet our budget report shows a $10,000 expenditure for community enhancements. Where did that money go, Tiffany? The room erupted into a cacophony of questions and shocked gasps. Tiffany's face was beet red. "Those are confidential reports, and that is a gross misrepresentation of the facts. I will have you removed for slandering me and this board." Her voice was high-pitched with panic. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The crowd was no longer a silent audience. They were an engaged jury. I heard people shouting, "What about the sidewalks?" And "What about the new rules?" Tiffany was no longer in control. She was on the defensive, flailing. She turned to the other board members, her eyes pleading for support. But they were all looking down, staring at the table.
Their silence was its own kind of betrayal. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, and I saw that the fear was gone, replaced with anger and a hunger for the truth. I reached for the next document in my binder, the one that would bring the whole house of cards tumbling down, the Declaration of Trust. I had my sword ready, poised to strike, and Tiffany, with a look of pure, unadulterated terror on her face, had no idea what was coming next. This was the moment of truth, and the community of Magnolia Creek was about to see just how deep the rot went. The room had fallen silent, the collective gaze of the community fixed on me. They were waiting. They had seen the budget report, seen the glaring lie in the numbers, and now they wanted to know what came next. Tiffany's face was a mask of furious desperation, her eyes darting between me and the crowd, a silent plea for someone, anyone, to come to her rescue. But no one did. Her own board members sat frozen, looking like deer caught in a car's headlights. Their perfect world was beginning to crack. I took a deep breath, the binder a heavy weight in my hands. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for, the moment I had been dreaming of. I opened the binder to the document I'd been saving for last. Earlier this year, I began, my voice clear and steady, many of us contributed to a special fund. It was for the community, for the Magnolia Creek Community Safety and Wellness Initiative. The fund was designed to help our elderly neighbors with things like security systems and medical alert bracelets. We all remember signing the check to contribute to that fund, right? I saw heads nodding in the crowd. Faces looked concerned, confused. A woman in the front row, a fragile, elderly lady who had lost her husband last year, put her hand over her heart. It was a fund born out of kindness, out of a genuine desire to care for one another. And that, I knew, was a weapon that Tiffany could not defend against. Well, I continued, holding up the document for everyone to see, I have here a copy of a Declaration of Trust. This document was created by the HOA board. It shows that every single penny you donated to that fund for the safety of our most vulnerable neighbors was immediately funneled into a private trust. A trust created for a private LLC called the Magnolia Blossom Group. And the beneficiaries of this trust are the members of your very own board, Tiffany, her husband, and two of their friends. The room exploded. The outrage was instantaneous and visceral. It wasn't just a budget discrepancy anymore. It was an act of heartless, sickening betrayal. Stealing from a fund meant to help the elderly? It was a low that even I, in my most cynical moments, had not anticipated. I saw the elderly woman in the front row begin to cry. I heard people shouting, their voices a furious storm of disgust. "You've got to be kidding me," one man yelled. "You stole from the safety fund?" another woman shrieked. Tiffany's carefully constructed world was crumbling before my eyes. She stood up, her face twisted with panic, and pointed a trembling finger at me. "That's a lie. She's lying. This is all a conspiracy," she screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. She lunged across the table, trying to grab the document from my hands, but Arthur was faster. He stepped between us, his broad frame a physical barrier. "You won't be touching anyone or anything, Tiffany," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "The time for that is over." The other board members, seeing their queen's collapse, began to flee. One of them, the man in the polo shirt, tried to slip out a side door, but was stopped by a group of angry neighbors. They were no longer an audience. They were a righteous mob. I stood there, a strange sense of calm settling over me amidst the chaos. My hands no longer trembled. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. Tiffany had shown me who she was in my very first week in this community. She had judged me for my appearance and assumed I was insignificant. She had tried to humiliate me, to silence me, and to make me disappear. And in her arrogance, she had failed to realize one crucial thing. I was not the victim she thought I was. I was a force to be reckoned with.
and she had just unleashed a force of her own. I watched as the crowd surrounded Tiffany, their faces a mixture of fury and sorrow. She was no longer a queen. She was just a cornered criminal. This was the end of her reign, but it was only the beginning of a new chapter for me. I had come to Magnolia Creek to find a peaceful life. Instead, I'd found a war, and I had won. But the true battle was still to come, a legal and emotional war that would not only expose every last one of their secrets, but also change Magnolia Creek and my own life forever.
The roar of the crowd faded into a stunned, disbelieving silence. The meeting ended not with a bang, but with a flood of furious voices and the abrupt departure of the disgraced HOA board members. I watched as Tiffany, her face a streaked mess of tears and a mask of pure terror, was cornered by neighbors who she had once so easily dismissed. The woman who had sneered at my swimsuit and accused me of trespassing on my own property was now being held accountable for a betrayal far more egregious. I didn't feel a sense of triumphant joy. Instead, a quiet solemnity settled over me. It was over. The battle I hadn't asked for was won, but the victory felt heavy. Arthur, his face grim but satisfied, clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Eleanor. You showed them what kind of people they really are." Mark was right behind him, holding my binder. "We have everything we need to move forward. The whole community is with us." And they were. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, supportive emails, and neighbors stopping by my house with casseroles and offers of help. I had gone from being the unwanted outsider to the de facto leader of the community's righteous rebellion. It was a strange role, one I hadn't sought, but was now embracing with a sense of quiet purpose. People shared their stories of being bullied by Tiffany, of their ideas being shot down, of their quiet frustrations that had finally found a voice. I was no longer just me. I was a symbol of what could happen when good people finally decided to stand up for themselves. My garden, the one that had started this entire affair, now felt like a relic of a simpler time. But it wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a promise of a better, more honest community. I met with a group of neighbors, the same people who had been too scared to speak up before, to discuss a new plan. This time, there was no board, no condescending sneers, just good people, all of us finally on the same side. We talked about how to move forward, how to rebuild the community trust that had been so cruelly shattered. We agreed to form a new temporary board and to hold a public, transparent vote for new leadership. But the most important work, the real justice, was yet to come. With Mark's legal guidance, we filed a formal complaint with the county detailing the fraud and misuse of funds. We prepared a civil lawsuit to recover every penny that had been funneled into Tiffany's private trust. It was going to be a long, drawn-out battle, but we were ready. This wasn't just about money. It was about principle. It was about making sure they couldn't get away with it. This was the factual victory that would make the moral one truly meaningful. A week later, I saw her. I was at the grocery store pushing my cart down the produce aisle. She was in the next aisle over, but I recognized her immediately. It was Tiffany, but she was a different woman. Gone was the perfectly pressed linen and the imperious air. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were wrinkled, and her face was pale and drawn out. She was alone, staring blankly at a row of vegetables, her eyes hollowed out. She looked like a ghost of her former self. The queen of Magnolia Creek had been dethroned, and the weight of her disgrace was a visible, physical thing. She hadn't just lost her power. She had lost everything. Our eyes met for a brief, awful moment. The flicker of fear in her gaze was gone, replaced with a vacant, defeated look. She just turned away and walked off, her shoulders slumped.
I didn't feel any satisfaction, just a quiet, profound sadness. She had built her life on a lie, and now she had to live with the truth. I finished my shopping and went home, my mind full of new possibilities. The front of my house was no longer just a house, it was a hub. Neighbors were coming and going, talking about the future, about the changes they wanted to see. I had found a new life here. Not the quiet, idyllic one I had hoped for, but a life of purpose, of community, of belonging. A life I had to fight for. The garden project was finally underway, a real group effort. We were breaking ground, digging into the earth, planting the seeds of our new community. As I knelt down in the dirt, planting a small sunflower, I felt the familiar, comforting warmth. It was David. He was here, in the sun, in the soil, in the sense of peace I had found after the storm. I had come to Magnolia Creek to find peace and a quiet life, but I had found something much better. I had found a community that was worth fighting for.
The legal battle with the old HOA board was a long, grueling affair, but we were ready for it. Mark, my new ally and legal advisor, was a force of nature. He had a quiet, relentless determination that was far more powerful than Tiffany's theatrical rage. With every legal document we filed, every deposition we took, the case against them grew stronger. The evidence was irrefutable. We had the documents, the bank statements, and the overwhelming support of the community. They were cornered, with no way out. The legal fees they were racking up trying to fight us were a poetic kind of justice, a slow-burning consequence of their greed. We didn't feel a need for speed. We felt a need for thoroughness. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was about proving, once and for all, that the truth would always find its way to the surface. In the end, it was a quiet surrender. Facing insurmountable evidence and the threat of criminal charges, Tiffany and the board members agreed to a settlement. They were forced to pay back every stolen penny, plus interest, and were permanently banned from any community leadership roles. The victory wasn't a loud, triumphant celebration. It was a silent, collective sigh of relief. The money, the community's money, was restored. The first order of business for the new, democratically elected board was to establish a transparent, public accounting system, and then we started to rebuild. The community garden, once a simple idea on a sketch pad, became our first project. It was a beautiful, collective effort. Neighbors who had never spoken before worked side by side, digging in the dirt, planting seeds, and sharing stories. The garden became a symbol of our new beginning, a living testament to what could be accomplished when people came together with a common purpose. It was messy and chaotic and full of life. Everything Tiffany had tried to prevent. The very first flowers to bloom were sunflowers, a tribute to David's memory, and the bright, persistent hope he had always inspired in me. My days were no longer spent in quiet solitude. My house, once just a safe haven from my grief, became a meeting place, a hub of activity. Arthur, Mark, and I would sit on my back patio, drinking iced tea and watching the garden grow, a quiet camaraderie settling between us. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were friends, bonded by a shared experience. I had come to Magnolia Creek to escape, but I had found something much better. I had found a community that was worth fighting for, a purpose that had pulled me out of my grief, and a new kind of family. My story isn't just about a fight against injustice. It's about a new beginning. It's about the fact that sometimes the greatest gifts are not what you expect, but what you have to fight for. This was my life now. Not just a quiet retirement, but a life rich with purpose, community, and the knowledge that I was the kind of woman who could not only plant a garden, but also expose a fraud and help a community rebuild itself from the ground up.